Joining us now, the woman I was just speaking with, one of the plaintiffs in that Colorado case that tried to keep Donald Trump off the ballot, Krista Kafer. She's also a columnist for the Denver Post. And with us, president of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics. You know him, Noah Bookbinder. His group assisted Krista and the other plaintiffs in bringing their case. So, Krista, you voted for Donald Trump in 2020. What made you want to keep him off the ballot entirely in 2024? And what do you say to those who say that he needs to be on the ballot? This is the voters' choice about who they put into the White House.
Well, voters are allowed to vote for anyone who is eligible and not for those who are ineligible. And somebody can be ineligible because of residency or not being a natural born citizen or having already been in office for 2 terms or having been involved in insurrection. And the Constitution is very, very clear on that point. When Donald Trump decided the day after the election, the day after I voted for him, that he wanted to disenfranchise 80 million voters that are my fellow Americans, voters that voted differently than me. When he decided to do that and continue to push that false narrative to the point of inciting violence on our Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power, I knew I had to do something. I'm proud of our effort. Obviously, I'm disappointed with today's ruling, but I would have done it again. I would do it again in a heartbeat.
So you liken trying to do this, to bring this lawsuit by putting a bell on a cat. Can you explain that metaphor to me and explain, is there another way, in your opinion, to put the bell on the cat now that the Supreme Court has said, no, this cat can't wear a bell?
Well, there's the old fable, which is that the mice get together and they decide that because the cat is such a danger to them, if they could just get a bell on the cat and hear him coming, they could save a lot of lives. And when they got the group together, though, nobody stepped forward. Nobody was willing to bell the cat. When I joined this lawsuit, that is exactly what I was thinking about, that, among other things, that particular fable, that we needed Republicans to step up and bell that cat. And, this effort wasn't just Republicans. It was Republicans, independents as litigants, but also several Democrats. Our amazing group of lawyers that worked for us were both, there were Republicans, Democrats, independents. But this was very, very bipartisan. My disappointment with the court, among other things today, is they said that only Congress can be the one that enforces this provision. Well, if you look at Congress right now, it is incredibly partisan. They basically handed a very big duty to a very, very partisan group of people who will more often than not act in their own self-interest, as in contrast to what we tried to do, which was bipartisan, seeking the good of everyone.
Noah, talk to me about that, this idea that there's no even federal body or federal judge that can take away the ability of somebody who was found to be an insurrectionist to run for office, that the only remedy is Congress itself.
Obviously, that's a distressing place to end up. I think one of the things that was most significant about this decision was what it doesn't have. So you had 9 justices writing, not a single one in there exonerated Donald Trump for engaging in insurrection. There's not a sentence in there that says that he didn't do it. And Donald Trump asked them to take that position. They pointedly chose not to do that. So we still are in a place where everybody that has every decision-making body that has substantively looked at it has found that Donald Trump engaged in insurrection. But what the Supreme Court did do is essentially take out the enforcement mechanism that would allow states to enforce that. At least if we look at what the concurring justices say, it seems like the Supreme Court may have taken out federal courts' ability and even Congress's non-legislative ability to enforce this. So now we're in a situation where, as we can very clearly say from everyone who's looked at this, Donald Trump engaged in insurrection to try to keep himself into power after losing an election, but nobody can do anything about it. And that sends it back to Congress, if this Congress could become functional, or to the American people to essentially enforce what the Constitution mandates.
Noah, do you have confidence in this court?
I will say that this court that I was pleased that this court did not go in some of the really dangerous directions they could have gone, like to try to find some way to say that Donald Trump didn't engage in insurrection, or to excuse presidents who hadn't previously served in office, which is basically a Donald Trump only exception. These are some of the dangerous paths that Donald Trump wanted them to take that they didn't. But ultimately, institution after institution has been kind of stepping aside instead of using the tools available to protect the democracy from those who have attacked it and could attack it again. I think it is disappointing that this court chose to be the next institution to not step up when it could have. And I do think that is disappointing.
What about you, Krista?
Yeah, obviously I respect the court, but like Noah, I'm concerned that they sort of dodged their responsibility to uphold the Constitution. I think this is, I've always liked the originalist and textualist approach to the Constitution, that we look at what the words say and what the words mean, not on the potential effect. And in fact, in departing from that originalist jurisprudence, this court has decided, hey, we're gonna rule on the effect, not the actual words of the Constitution. And in a sense, I'm empathetic. It would have been disruptive. But on one hand, it enacting not for us, it would no longer be disruptive, but I believe things could become more dangerous in that this sort of gives a green flag to any would-be officer of the law, somebody who holds that high office, who decides they don't like the results of an election, decides to foment insurrection and violence. This decision gives them a bit more of a green light to say, hey, there's really no downside. Unless Congress acts, I can continue to act in this way.
Krista Kafer, Noah Bookbinder, thank you very much for joining us.